I'm not good. Not bad. I've got a bullet with your... Well, I tried being reasonable.
One shot, one kill mechanics. They've been a part of Overwatch for quite a while, but it's taken us this long to finally stop and ask the question, seriously, should we even have them in the game? It's been quite a popular topic ever since Season 3 rolled around, and it might seem like a bit of a strange question to only be asking now. Hasn't the game always had one-shots? Why would we only be asking whether we want to remove them from the game now of all times? But actually, I think there's a lot of reasons why it makes sense we're only really having this conversation now. I think in Overwatch 1, stuns were much more of a concern, and one-shots from characters like Widow and Hanzo were greatly reduced in their effectiveness by the presence of double shield. Now we're in Overwatch 2, and double shield is no longer possible, combined with the fact that most stuns are removed from the game, which were the bigger issue. Now we can really see one-shots for the problem they are. It took us until Season 3 to see this, because in Season 1 and 2, Sojourn was dominating the ladder, and especially in Season 2 specifically, Roadhog was also a massive issue. Even though his one-shot is more of a close-range one, it was still an extremely disruptive one-shot, considering while it might be only medium to close range, it's medium to close range on a character who is practically fucking invincible. Now that we've seen nerfs to both Hog and Sojourn to remove their one-shots, and both of them has certainly been made much less effective, but still at least playable characters, when you get to see how much good it's done for the game's health to remove these characters' one-shots, to the point where I would honestly argue Season 3 onwards, Overwatch 2 has been in the most balanced state I have ever seen Overwatch in. It really makes you think whether one-shots as a whole are really good for the game, especially when the only two long-range one-shots left in the game, Widowmaker and Hanzo, who can both do it with their primary fires, are also some of the most disruptive and annoying characters to deal with left in the game. The general sentiment I see on the no one-shot side isn't one that doesn't understand the issue. I rarely see people argue that one-shots are exactly quote-unquote healthy for the game. More just that there would be more harm done removing them than good done. This is why we're mostly going to focus on Widowmaker for this video rather than Hanzo, because Widowmaker is the big concern. Widowmaker is a character defined by her ability to one-shot. What would you do to Widowmaker if you took away her ability to one-shot? Surely then she just becomes useless. Unless you want to give her buffs in other areas, but what can you buff? Maybe her damage output, even though she wouldn't be able to one-shot, maybe you can just make her fire faster to compensate. Maybe she gets more ammo in the clip, maybe she reloads faster, maybe she gets a better ultimate, maybe her abilities come back faster. But doing all this, all you're doing is making another Ashe.
Sometimes it's 6 shots, 1 kill. How do you even live?
Ashe is already a sniper who can deal more damage per second than Widow, but she can't one-shot. But for that, she gets abilities faster and she gets a stronger ultimate. Almost any change that is obvious that you could make to Widowmaker to try and compensate for taking away her one-shot would just make her more like an Ashe clone. So you really would have to make some drastic changes to Widow to really fix her, to the point where it might be difficult to make a version of Widow without the one-shot that's functional, without making a completely new character. However, I actually think I have a change in mind. One that I'm going to bring up later once we're done talking about the reason one-shots are a problem. But it's a change that I think wouldn't change the way she plays that much, while still removing her one-shot, but still making her a strong pick. But with that out of the way, why are one-shots a problem? Well, the short version is really simple, but the long version to actually address the counter-arguments is, well, quite long. The short version is that if there is a Widowmaker in your game, on the enemy team, who is landing shots, they are simply clicking on heads and they are landing their shots. What do? The answer is, you swap Widowmaker even though you know for a fact that they play Widowmaker and you don't, so you're already at a disadvantage, and you pray you can headshot them before they can headshot you, and if you can't do that, then you simply lose the game. Not swapping off of your character onto Widow to combat them is essentially throwing the game. And, well, this isn't fun. It's not very fun to be forced to play one out of all the possible characters in the game because if you do not play that one character, winning is simply physically impossible. With the consistent nerfs to hit scans over time with damage fall off, at this rate, trying to fight a Widowmaker at long range is just simply not even an option. However, the Widowmaker is very clearly going to position themselves somewhere far away and on high ground, but where she can still see you. In a situation where you simply cannot progress without walking into a sightline where the Widowmaker can shoot you from a long distance without you being able to fight back, you have simply hit a point in the game where without picking Widowmaker and firing back at them along that same sightline, you simply will not be able to play the game. And while we definitely have characters that allow you to express skill in Overwatch, and I'm not denying that headshots on Widow take skill, at the same time, there are other characters in the game that have insanely high skill ceilings, and these characters aren't allowed to simply destroy an entire lobby based off of their skill. Widowmaker seems to be the only character in the game where we give her a pass and say, well, she's allowed to delete an entire lobby just because she's got skill. But that's the reason why this debate is such a tough one, because at the end of the day, you only get to be this dominant as Widow if you land shots, and landing shots on Widow is hard, and so you can always argue, oh, well, it took skill, I deserve it. I mean, obviously you should be rewarded for having skill, and how else are you going to be rewarded but getting kills on the enemy? It's just there's an unfortunate side effect to that of, you know, not letting the enemies play the video game. Personally, I don't really buy this argument. I see where it's coming from, but ultimately, there are characters that are harder to play than Widowmaker that do not get anywhere near the reward Widowmaker does for playing well. When I think hardest characters in the game, it's very hard for me to pick one out of these three, but there are three characters in the game which I would say take an immense amount of skill in aim, positioning, movement mechanics, oftentimes having their own character-specific movement tech, simply characters that test your every single skill in Overwatch, rather than Widowmaker, who really just tests your aim and a little bit of your positioning and not really anything else. Those three characters are Wrecking Ball, Doomfist, and Genji. I'm not sure if this is a controversial take, but I don't think it'd be that controversial of me to say that I think all three of these characters have a higher skill ceiling than Widowmaker. While I would still agree that Widowmaker is more difficult to play than the average character, I would say that any of these three characters being played theoretically perfectly should be allowed to absolutely destroy Widow. And yet, in recent years, we've really seen the ability for Dive to actually kill Widow. Characters like Genji, Doomfist, and Ball is really dropping.
You seem nice. I hate to kill you. My work here is done.
These characters are still very good at harassing Widow, forcing her to escape to maybe slightly less effective sightlines. But at the end of the day, as long as she gets her pocket, it's almost impossible to kill Widow even when you play extremely effectively on any of these three characters. It's only really possible if multiple people all engage on the same target with you at the same time. And that's just a level of coordination that's not realistic outside of Overwatch League or a 5-stack. Honestly, in my opinion, actually a big part that's often overlooked of why Widowmaker is so oppressive right now is that she's supposed to be countered by these dive characters, but a big reason why she really isn't is because almost every dive character has a lot of spread on their weapon, because of the fact that they're encouraged to get up close to deal maximum damage. But the fact that Widowmaker has such a thin hitbox means that almost all of these dive characters will not be able to deal their maximum damage output even if aiming correctly due to their cone of spread, and the fact that her hitbox is so thin that about only half of your bullets will actually land on characters like Tracer, Sombra, Doomfist, and maybe not so much Wrecking Ball. Wrecking Ball's a little bit better for that, but even Wrecking Ball does have some spread. You only really get to land all your pellets on these characters when you're fighting a Widowmaker. If you're so close to her, you're basically breathing down her neck. And you don't really get opportunities like that very often. When you're fighting at even really close range, like 1.5 steps away from their face, you still see a lot of your pellets not connect simply because of how thin their hitbox is. So ultimately, while I agree that it takes skill to play Widow at this level, to get the reward of getting all these kills, at the same time, I don't think it's really fair considering while this is definitely a high standard of skill, there are other characters with even higher standards of skill, and these characters do not get anywhere near the amount of reward that Widowmaker does for performing to that standard. I mean, is there any other character in the entire game you can think of who can just casually wipe an entire enemy team single-handedly without using any abilities or ultimates. For most characters, that is unheard of, but Widowmaker, all it takes is 4 lucky headshots in a row, and maybe then a few body shots on the tank. Even I, and I definitely am a subpar Widow, have had games where I just get unlucky for a little bit, and I walk into a lobby and land 4 headshots in a row and wipe an entire team single-handedly without any help from my team. And obviously those moments feel good, but I also think, holy fuck, how is this character allowed to do this? Personally, I've never had the skill to be able to pull off Genji to anything beyond a average at best standard. And I've gone in and out of playing Doomfist, but ultimately I think my Doomfist is nothing impressive, although better than your average Doomfist. So out of these 3 particularly different characters, the only character that I feel very confident in is Ball. And let me tell you, while Ball is overall a pretty good solo carry character if you can really get good with him, Ball does not get to get free wipes on entire enemy teams on his own just because he plays well. All he really gets is the ability to avoid dying and the ability to harass people effectively and deal a lot of damage, but you might not necessarily get elims even if your aim is good. It depends on whether your team's able to follow up and how effectively the enemy supports are peeling for your targets. And while I'm not exactly a Doomfist or Genji connoisseur, from what I've seen, I'm pretty sure if I asked a Doomfist or Genji pro, they would also say they don't get to just kill an entire enemy team for free just because they performed well for a little bit. I don't know, maybe Genji at a stretch, if you land enough slash triple shuriken to the heads in a row, you can do it. But most of these characters only get a chance to wipe a team when they use their ultimate. And Widow just could at any moment just do it. No abilities, no cooldowns. She can just do it whenever she wants. And hell, I know that it's hard to pull this off, and so it doesn't happen all that often until you get to really high skill tiers. But even then, the fact that there's the threat it could happen at any moment makes it really hard to play around, because what? Are you just going to play the whole game assuming they're going to headshot you every time? If you do that, you'll never touch the payload. But if you play the game ignoring the possibility the Widow could just hit a million shots in a row, then it becomes a situation where you won't be playing around it, and so you'll play right into it and get destroyed. You're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. So yeah, I don't think one-shots are exactly great for the game because simply there is no counterplay. So while they might take skill to land, it's not necessarily a situation of you besting the enemies because the enemies didn't even get a chance to do anything in response. So as a result, you got a chance to do something, and yes, you performed that task correctly, which took skill, but the enemy, it's not like they could have had the skill to dodge it, or the skill to deflect it. I guess if you're a Genji, maybe you could deflect it, of course, but, you know, that's one character. You get what I'm saying. There's nothing you can do back, so the enemy didn't even get a chance at skill expression. So it's not really correct to say that, oh, I just simply outskilled them when I killed them on Widowmaker, because, again, the person you killed didn't even have a chance to do anything involving skill to counteract what you did. I mean, at this point, people saying use cover to counter Widowmaker is practically a meme in the community. Use cover is all well and good until the payload rolls into an area where there is no cover. Then what are you going to do? Everything I've said also kind of applies to Hanzo, but of course Hanzo being a projectile and not a hit scan, there's a little bit more room to argue that maybe it's fine. The fact that you actually have to predict where people are moving rather than simply clicking on the heads certainly means there's a lot more difficulty in landing his one-shot in theory, but I think that I'm going to have an easier time getting people to agree with removing Hanzo's one-shot, because everyone's experienced this, haven't you? The Hanzo who doesn't actually aim their headshots, they just spam arrows down a choke and they keep getting insta-kills off of it. And I know this is a stereotype of Hanzo, but I can definitely see that maybe some people think this is nothing more than a stereotype. I can assure you, I have only 1 or 2 hours on Hanzo and he is one of my least played heroes in this game. And this is gameplay of me on Hanzo, and I fucking dominated this game. And I don't think I have great Hanzo aim. I think I just kind of spammed arrows down chokes and I kept getting kills off of it. While Hanzo can theoretically take a lot of skill, you definitely can get a stupid amount of undeserved value on Hanzo just by spamming arrows. And ultimately, the fact that it's hard to predict enemies' movements almost encourages you to, rather than even attempt to predict people's movements, instead just spam arrows into areas where enemies couldn't possibly predict you were shooting there and just hope someone walks into it, because then they don't get a chance to dodge. Also, Hanzo has his own set of problems, which probably would make this video a bit too long if I focused on talking about all of them. But generally the short version is that, in my opinion, Hanzo doesn't really have a disadvantage state except his entire team being dead and him trying to get back to them but not having the mobility to do it. And the only character I can think of who's kind of like that is pre-nerf Roadhog, which would probably say a lot. I feel like anytime a character's only real disadvantage state is when all their teammates is dead, it's kind of a warning sign that character probably is not okay. There are very few characters in the game that I think actually effectively counter Hanzo, and even most of the counters I'm going to mention I feel are only soft counters. But funnily enough, all 4 of them are characters I've already mentioned in this video. I think the main counters to Hanzo is a Widowmaker, because hit scan faster than projectile, and the other 3 are the 3 characters I mentioned that I think are the hardest in the game to play: Genji, Doomfist, and Ball. Doomfist and Ball are both dive tanks, but unlike the other 2 dive tanks, D.Va and Winston, for Ball, you don't have to worry about getting headshot because you don't have a head hitbox while in Ball form, which is why I think Ball is good against Hanzo, but D.Va and Winston aren't. They get headshot too much and they die too fast with all Hanzo's burst damage. And Doomfist, while he can die fast to Hanzo, I think he's got a shot, considering you can get a lot of damage in while Hanzo is stunned after being punched into a wall. When you combine that with Hanzo's poor mobility, I think it's a little bit easier for Doomfist to deal damage to Hanzo compared to most characters in the game. And I think Genji's good against Hanzo since, again, Genji's kind of divey, and of course he has deflect to help deal with arrows and all that. I don't think the other divey DPS like Tracer and Sombra are particularly good against Hanzo because Sombra just can't kill Hanzo fast enough, and having an escape option isn't exactly helpful when the second you take damage you're already instantly dead. And for Tracer, if I remember right, can Hanzo just one-shot Tracer with a body shot? He doesn't even need to headshot, I don't think. So yeah, I think Genji's really the only DPS that's good at countering Hanzo besides Widowmaker. Anyway, I've spent too long talking about Hanzo now. All that said, let's get back to Widowmaker. How do we fix you? Well, I don't know if anyone's come up with this idea before, but I personally haven't heard this one anywhere. I always thought it'd be cool if Widowmaker had more of a theme of poison. However, the thing they did for the April Fool's patch I thought wasn't quite what I was looking for, but close to it. If you missed it, in the April Fool's patch, where they had their different game mode with all the different kind of memey changes to the characters, they made it so Widowmaker could no longer instantly kill people, but rather the damage she dealt would be damage over time as a poison for landing a shot on someone. I thought that was a kind of cool idea and would definitely help, but I don't think it would really fix anything straight away. The fact you could still one-shot people meant that even if it was a damage over time, it would mean that supports would make it not kill instantly, but if there wasn't a support or health pack right next to you, then you would still just die, and even worse, you would have to just sit there and wait to die. Not to mention, I worry that this version of Widowmaker would actually become too weak because as long as there was a support around, you would basically never be able to kill anyone ever again. So here's my idea instead. Widowmaker can no longer one-shot. Instead, she deals 150 for a headshot like Ashe does. But wait, her weapon now has a new ability, just a passive thing that happens anytime you land a headshot. All headshots apply anti-heal to the target with Widowmaker, and the duration of the anti-heal scales with the charge of the shot. I don't have an exact maximum duration in mind, but I don't know, 3 seconds-ish. So hopefully you can see where this is going. The fact that you could put someone on extremely low health and antied with one shot may not be a one-shot, but you could very easily still kill most people realistically with this. It's still a lot of damage from an extremely safe range. It denies them getting any healing to bail them out of it for the next couple seconds unless they receive a Suzu. And the fact that you can reapply the anti-heal whenever you want just by landing another headshot means that even a Suzu might not be able to save them. As well as that, if you're able to land a headshot and then before they can even react to being headshot, you can land another headshot which isn't fully charged but still does enough to kill them, then you could still kill them almost instantly, and that would be good enough in 90% of situations. It would just give them a very small window to quickly use a mobility ability to dodge out the way or something like that. That way the person getting shot at least has an opportunity to respond, even though the Widowmaker is still able to kill people extremely quickly from an extremely far distance. As well as that, it would also mean getting kills with Widowmaker would take more skill. You don't just have to land one headshot now, but after landing the headshot and after the person starts panicking and moving, you now also have to land a follow-up shot a split second later. But you've got the guarantee that that follow-up shot will kill them thanks to the anti-heal. There's only one thing that could go wrong here, I feel, with this character design. A part of this which is a bit of a double-edged sword is the fact that this would obviously be much more effective against tanks. I think that's cool because it means Widowmaker is no longer as useless against tanks, but it's also kind of bad because you can imagine the dystopian future in which Widowmaker is meta not for actually killing anyone, but just for making the enemy tank permanently antied. This is why I want to make it so the anti only applies on headshots, because while it is very easy to body shot a tank, most tanks, not all of them, but most, actually are relatively difficult to headshot. Zarya has an awkward head bobbing animation which makes consistent headshots on her difficult. Characters with broader shoulders like Sigma kind of hide their head hitbox between their shoulders. Any character who has a barrier or similar sort of defensive ability can obviously temporarily disable their head hitbox from being able to be shot, and of course Orisa has Fortify, so I really think there wouldn't be many tanks who could be consistently headshot all the time. But I could see how in theory it could be scary. Maybe you'd have to make a thing kind of like they did with Sleep Dart, where the anti-heal on Widow would scale down whenever used on a tank so they would last for less time. Either way, I definitely think this would be the way to go if you wanted to fix Widowmaker. It would make her much less of an oppressive and cancerous character to play against, who just ruins the game for anyone who wants to test their skill in any way that isn't pure aim and nothing else. But still there would be a reason to pick her. As I say, I think if you did a simple rework to her where she simply deals more damage overall in terms of DPS but doesn't get the burst damage to one shot, then all you would do is create a discount Ashe. But this way, Widowmaker would still have her identity of being a bit more frail than Ashe, having a bit of a weaker ultimate and not having as much pure DPS, but she would get that insane reward for headshots that Ashe doesn't get. Only now that insane reward wouldn't be an insta-kill, but rather the anti-heal, which I do think would be a powerful enough utility that it would still make her a more than playable character. With that said, what do you think of that concept for a reworked Widowmaker to remove the one-shot? And actually tell me in the comments below if any of you do think the one-shot should stay. I can't think of any reason why they should. I mean, the only time I really defended one-shots in the game is back when Sojourn still had a one-shot. I kind of didn't like the idea of removing it. And to be fair, I definitely have backtracked on that opinion. I think that was a bad take. That, and I liked how much solo carry potential it gave Sojourn. But obviously in hindsight, I can see that it was definitely a bad take from me that, oh yeah, she should still be able to one-shot with the railgun. And removing it was definitely good for the game. Although I will say, I kind of recovered a bit with the fact that I said the perfect change that it should do for this is to make it so that her railgun headshots deal 1.5 times damage instead of double, so that she deals 195. And I didn't think they would actually do that because they'd never done it before for a character, and then that ended up being the exact change they made, which made Sojourn balanced, so hey, at least I scored some points on the recovery there. Anyway, thank you for watching, and let me know what you thought of this, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.